21st meeting of the Law, Buildings, and Code Enforcement Committee. Present are members of the council, a member of the committee, Michael O'Brien, Ginny Farrell, and Darcy Applyrs. And also being present are council members Derek Johnson, Jamal Robinson, Kelly Kimbrough, Richard Conti. Okay, so this evening we are here to have a discussion on two proposed ordinances, or one ordinance, 35-10119, an ordinance amending the code of the City of Albany by enacting a new chapter 183 to be entitled Equity Agenda. We'll also be taking up resolution number 69-10119R, resolution recognizing Albany Housing Authority's commitment to supporting equity across the city by providing an annual educational scholarship for youth towards higher education. So we're going to start this by Darcy. Darcy, you being the sponsor, give your opening remarks, and I believe, Cora, if you want to do that opening up too, or wait till the end, okay? And then we'll go to members of the committee first, and then we'll go to other council members. And we will have public comment at the end, and it is really just comment, okay?
Joe, I just also want to point out that the mayor and her team are here giving some of the questions that came up about the
Yes, thank you.
Agenda. So they have prepared a presentation also.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, we did request that, right?
Come on now.
So why don't you guys, want to use the chairs? Or?
So I'll just provide some overarching context, and then Council President Ellis, if you want to share a few words, and then we'll, to be respectful of the mayor and her team's time, turn the floor over to you all. And
okay,
then
that's fine. Sorry, Mr. Sidney.
Okay, so just overarching comments. So the impetus for this legislation last year, when we experienced quite a bit of violence in our city, council members, in partnership with the mayor, put our heads together to figure out what we could do to address the violence in our city. And this meeting was called by Councilman Robinson and Councilwoman Love because the violence was happening disproportionately in their wards. And so one of the things that came out of that meeting was that myself and Council President Ellis agreed to take a look at some of the systemic issues that impact violence, that contribute to violence, and come up with legislation. Most of the council members around this table, including those who aren't here, we all were asking the question, what can we do as a legislative body? And so the intent of this legislation is to use what's in our toolbox, which is policy and legislation to bring about systemic change. One of the things that we know contributes to violence in our communities is the long-term impacts of racism, which contributes to things like poverty, housing, poor infrastructure, poor educational systems. And so this legislation seeks to address many of those factors that get at the surface, which is violence in our city. So high level, what this legislation seeks to address, the built environment, and I won't get in the weeds on it just yet, but when people step out of their doors, how do they feel about their community? What do they see when they step out of their doors? Their streets, their sidewalks, trees, receptacles in their neighborhoods, lighting. Those things matter in terms of how people feel and respond to their environment. This legislation also has baked in the reconfiguration of a violence prevention task force, which will be convened every year in the fall to start the conversation early instead of being reactive every year. We know that violence is an uptick every summer, so this task force would be charged with coming up with strategies and solutions proactively to address violence, and there's money allocated in the legislation that would go towards funding violence prevention initiatives. Education is also a component of this, and Albany Housing Authority has graciously agreed to provide scholarships to youth and adults who are interested in furthering their education, those who traditionally don't have opportunities to do so. There is also baked into this legislation resources as it relates to our parks, going back to the built infrastructure, in which there would be an assessment done every year by our department, two departments in particular, who would provide a concrete and comprehensive assessment of our parks. I know every time that violence erupts, we talk about our young people and them not having proper places to play and just be children, and so that's why that's in here. Let's see. Also baked into this legislation is some language about the mayor's office in partnership with the Department of Administrative Services to develop a communication strategy. Every year when we talk about violence in our city, careers come up. We need to make sure that the people in our community have access to jobs, to careers, to training. And so what we find every year when we have this conversation is that those resources already exist in our city. The problem is people are oftentimes not connected to the information in those resources. And so this legislation proposes that out of the mayor's office, in partnership with the administrative department, there would be a communication strategy developed that would go out citywide to talk about summer jobs, job fairs, workforce development training centers, information about civil service testing. Again, highlighting resources that already exist in our community. Another aspect of this legislation is working to provide some teeth to our Human Rights Commission. They have a desire to do more, and so this really gives them the opportunity to do what they were designed to do. So for example, they would be charged with implementing and hosting an annual dialogue on race citywide. They would also be providing the administration with recommendations and strategies regarding the administration's equity agenda. So they would be taking a comprehensive look at that agenda every year and providing recommendations. And then lastly, I'll highlight that this legislation also proposes that there would be an employee racial equity training in which the administration will ensure that city employees receive annual training on race, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And this would be for all staff who work for the city. So that is a high-level overview of this legislation. With that, I'll pause to see if you have some remarks.
Yeah, just real quick. I think the legislation, when me and Mr. Applyrs decided to really get into this, we really reached out to the appropriate avenues to really talk about what our vision was and why it needed to be in law and not just a feel-good moment. It needed to be in law because now we're replacing something that we have, that future, when administrations change and council members change, that we have something, that a document that we're working off of, which is going to continue to be focused on is our city being diversified in every aspect, but also with the Human Rights Commission, is giving our Human Rights Commission really a task that they can be the organization that looks at, are we reaching our benchmarks? Are we really doing what we say we're going to do in this legislation? And I believe that this is a great start. I believe it's long overdue, and we're at the point in the city where we want to be recognized as being inclusive, but also recognizing the past and how these neighborhoods were affected because of systematic racism. And we cannot move forward and build on that unless we recognize that. And I think this legislation says that, we recognize it, and we're moving forward and building on it. So.
Thank you. I'll just also note that this is the second piece of legislation of its kind. The first equity legislation was enacted in Charlottesville, and so this somewhat models that legislation. And then I'll also point out that the mayor already has initiated an equity agenda. And so this really helps to operationalize some of what the mayor has already implemented. Some of what's in here, the mayor has already, the departments have already started to implement. And so I'll turn it over to you, Mayor, so that you can talk more about what you all are doing.
Great, thank you. And when I came into office and had a group of people who came together, about 125 of them on various committees, that created a real blueprint, a transition report for me. What was interesting to me was that under every category that we asked people to look at, economic development, neighborhoods, the city's fiscal condition, our historic resources, that every one of those groups independently talked about the importance of equity and the importance of ensuring that we focused on every neighborhood, but in particular our neighborhoods that had historically received fewer resources. And when you really start to break that down and operationalize that, it takes a tremendous amount of work. And so initially we had an equity advisory committee that focused on some small sort of tests of what can we do, right, around equity. At the same time, we were building the infrastructure to allow us to actually get serious about understanding where we have inequities, how those play out, and how what we're doing is impacting that inequity. And so when we talk about a city where every neighborhood works, where every neighborhood is safe, where every neighborhood has quality housing that's affordable to the people that live there, where every neighborhood has access to jobs, we start to be able to now have the means in place to measure that and to provide a platform upon which we can have candid discussions. And the measures that are laid out in this legislation are measures that this administration is committed to making anyway. The decisions that we make about where we invest in parks, roads that are going to be repaved, where we are going to focus our resources, are already being improved by the fact that we now have the ability to better understand our data, to better understand what's happening where, and then to go about the business of figuring out how to drive resources where we have underserved communities. And we're looking at it both internally with how we hire and how we measure who we hire. We have a new process in place in the Department of General Services for how we determine what roads are going to be paved. And all of those take into consideration the lens of equity that is suggested in this legislation. This legislation, from my perspective, allows this body to be taking an active role in ensuring that we're creating a city where every neighborhood works. And so I brought with me 3 very simple maps that tell a story. And they tell a story because we now have the tools in place and the data in place to be able to have a much better understanding of what's happening. So I'm going to talk about 3 things that may seem unrelated, but are actually very related. I'm going to talk about this map, which I'm handing out to you. If you guys want to take one and pass it on. This is a map that, with the exception of what happened over the weekend, shows where every confirmed shooting in the city of Albany has taken place. And not surprisingly, the locations of where we have had shots fired in the city of Albany track poverty almost 100%. Almost 100%. Okay, so that's what this map shows.
What year is this?
This is this year. Okay, so I saw that map and I was able to say to And now this is just WIOA funding. This isn't everybody that we've helped get jobs. This is just the data that we have with respect to the federal funds that we have for, and the reason that you see dots outside of the City of Albany is because this is a county-wide program. But I wanted to know, who are we helping to get jobs? Who are we helping with our workforce money? Because if this map had looked really different from this map, I would expect all of you to be asking me a lot of questions. But in fact, the map that shows where we're spending our WIOA dollars closely aligns with the map of where we're seeing violence, right? So that's not to say that, that there's a problem here, right? But it's saying that we are impacting the communities that we are seeking to impact. And we need to figure out, how do we impact more people within these communities? What this tells me is that we actually have validators in the very neighborhoods where we also have gun violence. And how do we reach out to those validators and help to ensure that we're delivering more services through WIOA and through our workforce funding to people who live in these very neighborhoods? So that's just one way that you can use data, right, through a lens of equity. Because as I said, if this map had a bunch of outliers where all of your red was up here and we weren't serving anyone in these communities, then that would be a different challenge for us. But what this tells us is that just as Dorsey talked about within this legislation, we have services, and we even have those services in the neighborhoods where we need them, but we still need to communicate because we're missing people. And this is an opportunity map to me, right? The next map that I'm going to hand out to you deals with our kids, because this map is the result of a program that we started in Livingston Park, and this was at the suggestion actually of Councilmember Robinson, who said, remember the days when we had the green bins and we had people in the parks, right? What, Johnson, what did I say?
You said the wrong.
Sorry. It's in Councilmember Robinson's ward, sorry. So take that and pass it around. So we did that, and the first year that we did it, we did it reactionary last summer for a couple weeks. We didn't have a lot of people show up. We did it this summer for the entire summer, and we had 28 kids enrolled in that camp. So that camp is in yellow, and the Hoffman camp is in blue. What's interesting is that only 5 of the participants in that program in Livingston Park, of 28 kids, only 5 of them came from the neighborhood. So there are people in Pine Hills and in the South End who found that program and enrolled their children, but people in the neighborhood did not. And there was capacity for more than 28 kids. So this also shows you where the participants in the Hoffman summer camps are coming from. So that's not to say that we don't want to pull kids from Pine Hills. Kids in Pine Hills need programs too. But it's telling us a story that there are folks that are finding these resources, but then there are people who are right in that backyard and they're not finding that resource. And so what this tells us is that well in advance of next summer, we need to be knocking doors with council members Robinson and Love around that park. We need to be talking about what's available. We need to be asking people what they need so that we can increase participation in having a safe place for kids to play. And so when we talk about an equity agenda and when we talk about this legislation, this needs to become second nature to everyone in city government. And I believe that having members of this council on board demanding this type of information, demanding that we are really looking at how we spend our resources through a lens of equity, through a lens of where there have been a lack of resource, right? To where where we still in West Hill have sidewalks that are made of asphalt. They're not even concrete, right? That we are all looking at that and talking about it, because that is one of the ways that it gets reinforced in our workforce and gets reinforced in our departments, and it becomes second nature. My hope is that a year from now, 2 years from now, every commissioner who comes to see you, every director who you have questions about, is going to be able to very clearly articulate to you where our resources are spent. And so when Dorsey talked about funding for violence prevention, it was really easy for me to say, yeah, we can commit to funding for violence prevention because we already do it, but we don't think about it that way. The police department isn't breaking that down and quantifying it as this is violence prevention, this is a violence prevention program, and we're making this investment. And it's important that every single member of our police department knows that we're making an investment in violence prevention. And so quantifying that is really important. Quantifying how we decide to repave roads is really important. It's important for our engineering department to understand and to appreciate the impact that that can have in transforming a neighborhood. The streetlight project has really helped to shift how some people view what we are doing in the city, because we made a commitment. We said we were going to start in our most underserved neighborhoods, the places with the highest crime. And notwithstanding the fact that we met with a member of the community who had to watch a person murdered outside the front of her house, she said, I feel safe now for the first time walking to and from my car when I go to work. The lights make a difference, and they matter. And so we still have work to do, but we are sending a message to a community that we care, and I believe that in supporting this legislation, this council is reinforcing that message. And I think that while there may be specifics in this that you want to discuss and question and debate, the underlying premise that we have to hold a mirror up to what it is that we're doing, quantify it, and provide data and information is something that we're committed to creating in this administration, regardless of how you move forward. I believe it will be more impactful if this body is working alongside us, asking for the same type of information, receiving regular reports about our hiring practices, our infrastructure investments, and what we're doing to create a city where every neighborhood works.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, hello everybody. So as a community outreach coordinator and the chair of the equity agenda, I focus my work on creating partnerships within the community. I've made partnerships, or we've made partnerships under this administration with our teams and our different organizations with Albany Medical Center, St. Peter's, and different other facilities that provide employment that are centered around not only economic development, but also the social determinants of health, which we were able to ensure that there were ERN specialists that were available, which are like kind of like social workers, available at the workplace to help people with their barriers. We're committed to economic development with increasing our trainings, our workforce development programs and initiatives at 175 Henry Johnson Boulevard. Also, we are working on a resource guide, which is going to be available electronically for residents that are able to find the resources that they're looking for inside of their community with one click of a button. We did a pilot over the summer, which had over 1,000 clicks and had some good reports from residents where they were able to find summer programming, summer meals, and different resources over the summer using that platform. So we're working on expanding that platform now. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Unless you guys have any other questions.
I get a couple of questions. Well, first of all, I think that everybody agrees that there should be some good metrics for measuring equity, and that's mostly where my questions center. The proposed legislation uses, instead of referring to neighborhood, well, it does refer to neighborhoods, but it seems that the governing metric is wards, and the Council Ops Committee at the very first meeting said that ward lines are very arbitrary. And from my perspective, I've seen that they are. I've seen them zigzag through neighborhoods, split streets in half, split neighborhoods. And the first meeting of the Council Ops Committee, one of their major observations was it should be more measured neighborhood by neighborhood, and that ward lines are kind of artificial. And they're all going to change in 2020. The last census changed them dramatically. I assume it will again. So that's one of the metrics which I would question. The road scores right now are 3 years old. The road scores which we're using for 2020 are 3 years old, and some streets have gotten worse. So is there any way of making the road scores more current? And then the other point is, I know sidewalks were discussed in the DGS meeting, but I don't see sidewalks included in the actual legislation. And I know, Dorothy, you were the one who actually brought that up in the DGS committee meeting, that scoring sidewalks are almost as important as scoring streets, and yet I don't see it made its way into the final version of the legislation. And that gets into a can of worms too, because some neighborhoods don't even have sidewalks. So those are my points as a starter.
If I could just start with the sidewalks, there is reference to sidewalks in the legislation, so what specifically?
I must have missed it.
So
But not as far as they aren't ranked.
But they aren't ranked. And yet that question came up. And that was one of the things that Sergio and Frank Zioli were supposed to get back to us on. And I never got any thoughts back from them as to how to rate the walkability street by street by street.
So Mike, in here, it does talk about ratings of street and sidewalk reconstructions and enhancements.
Yeah, can you point that out for me?
It's at the bottom of it says built environment
Right,
enhancements at the bottom of A. I had a question on that too, because again, and specifically in my ward, the big issue where there's no sidewalks is Breviter. It's like a drag race strip. There are people, so if we talk about equity, I think I love this, and this can be great as is, but I also hope that we recognize that within wards, there's not always equity. So I have kids that walk along Breviter to get to school, and there's no sidewalks, and it's a drag race. So that, to me, I would rather have an asphalt sidewalk. So things like that where...
So I'll just say to that, Jenny, because I know that, there's a concern about a reallocation of resources. What this suggests is that the wards that have been disproportionately overlooked historically are prioritized, but that does not mean that this would preclude the administration from disseminating resources to other wards. It's just saying from an equity lens, we need to be realistic about the fact that, and now since Councilman Robinson is sitting next to you, when you compare your ward to
absolutely.
Councilman Robinson's ward.
And I don't have an issue with that.
I just want to make the point that when you look at the two wards, it's the tale of two cities. And so it's just saying that from an equity lens, we need to make sure, in order to bring up the quality of life for residents in Member Robinson's ward, we need to address it with additional resources that the ward hasn't seen
And
historically.
I don't have an issue with that, but what I'm saying is, even within my ward, there is a tale of two cities.
And I get the same
So
with
that's, like, I
think-
don't want the parts of my ward that have been forgotten, along with the other parts of the city, to be forgotten. Because I have Section 8 housing, I have.
But Jenny, to your point, this is not about forgetting
Good.
about
That's all I want to make sure that is out there.
pockets in various wards. It's just suggesting that we need to pay close attention to wards that have never received. And so,
And
that's the
again,
point.
I don't have a problem with that, but I do, as we're looking through, it's an important point for me to make, because people will say, like there's, and I agree, my ward has gotten, I would love for more resources to go to overlooked wards.
So we're saying the
But
same thing then.
We are, but my request is there, I guess more to the mayor, there are pockets in every ward where there are places that are forgotten. And let's not forget those places just because they happen to be in a different ward.
And no one is suggesting that is the point. So
Hold on, Mike.
to Mike, I want to go back to your question, because you had three. The first one was about the sidewalk. So that language is in
Right, but
here.
we don't have a metric for measuring the walkability throughout different parts of the city.
And I will not be able to commit to providing that in the immediate future. We are working on metrics with the data that we have, with the resources that we have. And so, I don't want the perfect to get in the way of the good. We know that is an area where we need to focus. And again, this is about providing information so that you can have a discussion about the allocation of scarce resources in a context that has not been provided in the past, or that in some cases were intentionally overlooked in the past.
But how do we start now, even though we aren't going to instantly start putting sidewalks on Brevidor or on Rapp Road or on Frontage Road? How do we start at least focusing?
Or in the second ward and the
Or-
first ward,
true.
where you also have children walking to school in places that people use as speedways that don't have
And
sidewalks.
it shouldn't happen anywhere. And I just hope that we can get a metric focused on it soon, so that before people get hurt. That's my point. And bring up to date the fact that our road metrics are 3 years old for planning 2020.
If you're going by that number thing, yes, okay. Sidewalks.
That's not the only metrics we use, but I understood.
Okay.
Some metrics that we haven't seen in a while. The police used to do crime mapping. We haven't seen that in a while, okay? But in the way it was set up, it wasn't wards, it was, even in the way they grouped it, neighborhoods weren't really the neighborhoods, whatever. Maybe you should go to what planning considers and do crime mapping that way, but that's data that we haven't seen in years. They just did away with it. We see things that happen in Nixle, but we don't see any statistics or data.
Okay.
But
No,
yes.
Ms. Page, I'm sorry. There was a comment about receiving information broken down by ward versus neighborhood. And right now, we receive our information based on wards. So when we get a list from DGS about streets being redone and sidewalks, it is based on a ward-by-ward basis.
Well, you could say ward, and you could say this neighborhood right next to
Yeah.
it, 14th, Eagle Point,
Right, but
whatever it is.
historically,
I
it's
know.
always been done by ward, so it's not like that's a new,
Well, like, for example, when they paved all of Central Avenue, that wasn't done by ward, that was done by a different graphic. It was done by
well,
this particular
that was a
arterial.
federally funded project, but that also, the map showed each ward,
Oh, there were several,
yeah, right.
probably
Well,
6 or
Pearl
7.
Street crossed ward, so it's
Right.
not, yeah.
Well, sorry, I don't just want us to get caught up on sidewalks and streets. That's part of the legislation. But, you know, the bigger part is, as a council, as a body, we're saying what we are saying moving forward on how we want our city, beyond this administration, to the next one, how we want our city to view each and every neighborhood on a consistent basis based off of equity. I think that's the most important thing about this legislation, and that it's in writing, and that we have a mechanism to hold the next administration accountable for that. And I think when we look at that overall view, I think this is the start of that direction. Yes, we can later on go down the road, like you said, Mike, with the sidewalks. That's a later discussion, but right now, this is more than just city. This is more than just about sidewalks and streets.
Okay.
It's about an attitude. It's about a mindset. It's about our city council showing that we understand the challenges, the things the people that have been left behind in this city. And we're trying to start the process of correcting that so it doesn't ever happen again.
I agree with Corey, but I also have to say, okay, to my constituents that tell me we're being left behind, and you know on what? Public safety, okay? We know that we don't have the police officers right now, okay? And I understand where the resources have to go, right? But safety is a big thing. I don't care if it's traffic, whatever, and this and that. When I hear from the people, you know, all of a sudden you got a couple shootings up here and there, where all these robberies are going on in the cars every night and this and that. That's a little bit of equity agenda too. That you know we feel like, all right.
Well, we haven't cut back on the police force.
No,
I mean it's in the budget. We're allocating resources for that, so I don't.
No, I know, but
cut back. So those resources are there. The chief and the police department, they structure it based off what they have. We got, you know, new academy coming up. So those things are
Corey, I understand.
So I think if we're talking to citizens about the expectations, we have to be, it's budgeted for police officers. We feel we need more. This council is for figuring out how we continue to grow that and being a part of making sure we have a number of
we all understand that.
tests.
All I'm saying is, okay, even when people are asking to fill the seats on ACPAC, okay, there were, I don't know how many vacancies we have right now, but for years I couldn't get anybody to stay on it. Why? Because all they talked about, okay, at these meetings were the beat cops, the community police and whatever, and that didn't affect any of the people that I appointed. They never talked about it.
Well, I'm glad that the gentleman came in front of us, and he did say it was just not about it was about some members, but now they have a different format, so that chair is going to be making sure that the format takes
It grew into that because, I mean, this has been going on 15 years now, from whatever to
so
the
I'm glad
problems that they have now.
said that, you know, there's going to be a separate
Well, he
way
started
they're
doing
going
it too.
to view
And Joe, I want to, because I know that you've raised this issue
I've raised it in the past.
a lot, and I want to be sensitive to it, because everyone wants to feel safe in their neighborhood. And I was recently on a call, actually Friday, with Councilman Robinson, Chief, the Mayor, and some residents, because there was, again, shootings in Councilman Robinson's ward and Councilwoman Love's ward. And the chief, during that call, we have a pie this big, and what he explained during that call was that he is applying an equity lens to how he deploys resources within the department, and it's based on need. And so I'm sensitive to what you're saying, but given the recent acts of violence.
I understand that, and there's needs, and crime brings that up, and you know, incidents like that. But you know what? Traffic safety is an issue too.
So Joe, until we get real about fixing these neighborhoods that have been neglected, where you walk in your neighborhood, you would not see the things that I see when I walk in these neighborhoods that have been there for decades.
I've walked in those neighborhoods. I know how they've changed. I wouldn't want to go into those neighborhoods.
But Joe, this is about recognizing that we have a role to play.
I recognize what you're saying. I'm just making my point.
And the faster we can do that, the more resource we are going to have with respect to traffic safety, making the city more walkable, being able to invest in pedestrian infrastructure. I mean, I'm going to lighten the mood here a little bit. So if everyone would just drive the speed limit and pick up their garbage, none of you would have anything to do, and neither would I. I mean, those are the two biggest complaints that we get, aside from the much more serious stuff around violence, right? But ultimately, I hear it in every ward, on every street, in every block. People go too fast, and oh my God, they throw their garbage everywhere, right? So, I wish people would go the speed limit, and I wish that we were able to get our arms around, being more respectful with our garbage. But ultimately, the message that is sent to you when you live in the neighborhoods that we're talking about here is that nobody cares. Nobody cares.
I can understand that, and I appreciate everything that you've started, okay? I really do. It's been long overdue, okay? And, there's just concerns, other things that I hear about, okay, which a lot don't. Okay? And you know what that is? Taxes. Mm-hmm. Taxes in schools, and how come we can't go from here to there. I understand in the summer programs, youth summer programs this year, okay, that you had to go to Albany High, okay? Well, there are people in my ward that pay taxes, and they send their kids to a Catholic high school, whether it's, across in Troy, Catholic High, or Troy, whatever. They pay the same taxes, and they're saying, my kid, and I pay taxes, and I can't keep my son busy in a summer program. That doesn't seem fair, and there are things like that.
We have free summer program for all City of Albany residents, regardless of where they live.
Well, these people were turned down. I'll have to get back to them.
It just has to do with where they got their working papers. They needed to go to Albany High to get their working papers, which they could
That's
do
not what they
if
told
they
me.
were a city resident. Yeah. They just had to go there to get their working papers.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally feel that as a community, I know we're talking about wards and, everybody has a common council member, but we have to realize that we all have to work collectively. And right now we have an epidemic in our community, which is the City of Albany, where we all need to focus on equity as well as the other issues at the same time. Unfortunately, we have a lot of violence, and we have a lot of people that are dealing with a lot of inequities in these formerly underserved areas. I understand as the community outreach coordinator firsthand, I speak to people in your wards, I speak to people in every ward. But the thing is that until, like the mayor says, we have a level playing field here, we're not going to be able to really get far at all. And to what Councilwoman Applyrs was saying, nobody is forgetting about the other wards and the things that are important to you as well. Each department in the City of Albany works in an equitable way. All of our commissioners and our department heads, look at, okay, what is the best way to address X, Y, and Z? And that's the way we want to continue to do that. I believe that we need to look at this in a collective manner. I know, you just said you wouldn't want to walk in that neighborhood. I live in that neighborhood. My children walk in that neighborhood, and a lot of us, we live in those neighborhoods, and people that I love and I adore live in those neighborhoods. So I want to walk in my neighborhood, and I want to be safe in my neighborhood, and I want to feel comfortable.
And I didn't mean to say I wouldn't walk in those neighborhoods. Not like I did when I was a youth, okay?
Right.
I would play in North Albany, I'd shoot hoops over in Huffman, I'd shoot
Well, that's what we
pool
want
on
it to be.
Delaware Avenue. And I wouldn't want kids walking, and they shouldn't be safe, walk from here to there or whatever, and
So as a collective, we should be looking at how are we going to make these neighborhoods walkable? How are we going to make these neighborhoods livable and comfortable and safe where everybody feels comfortable? And then also address the other issues that we have citywide.
Can I just make a
And then
follow-up
I want to
request
get back
for
to
that?
the committee members and go around to other.
Because
Wait a
and I agree, we do need to allocate resources. Everyone should feel safe. I mean, that's the bottom line. Everybody should feel safe. But, for example, today, the gun scare was in my ward, and Alfredo's ward. So I do think that it is something where we need to talk citywide. So when there are conversations about the gun violence, include the people who it's impacting. You might not think of it impacting my ward, but in my ward, there was a lockdown today and a lock-in of students. And that impacts, it directly impacts my kids, obviously, but it also impacts the people in my ward. So there's a lot of, and I want everyone to have all the conversations, but please think of us because, and it also, we just had a neighborhood association meeting based on this. where it's the kind of the Beverwick, where there's a lot of different things that are happening with kids. And since a lot of this violence, unfortunately, is youth-based, it is coming around the high school. So again, this isn't about allocation. This is just, if we're talking about citywide, include us.
And Ginny, I think that's a perfect segue to, you know, from the administration standpoint, you're asking us, this legislation asks us for data, and it asks us to provide information, and it requires us to be more analytical about the programs that we are implementing and the impact that we're having, and whether or not those programs are effective. Because we want to make sure that we're not, you know, that we're trying to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so from the standpoint of how to best go about addressing some of these issues, some of that might be that there are children who stay in your ward. In other words, that we have programming that's happening at the high school because that is where, as a result of a community conversation, we want to focus programming. And then what are the impacts that then has with respect to the neighborhood and traffic and all of those issues? So, you know, I hope that, you know, every council member will see that having this information at their fingertips allows us to respond more effectively and really drill down and look at where we have challenges. But, you know, again, the thing that I think is really important, no one at this table, you know, I should say, everyone at this table understands this. Everyone at this table wants to create a city where every neighborhood works. And all of you work really hard to do that. The reality is, though, that we've inherited a system that created neighborhoods that intentionally don't work. We have neighborhoods where we intentionally, on purpose, concentrated poverty, where we intentionally, on purpose, didn't give kids the same opportunities in schools. And even though that may have happened decades ago, and we have changed and done so many incredible things, people sitting around this table fought to make those changes. The impact that it has had is generational. The impact that it has had is why we feel so passionate about calling it out and acknowledging it so that we can work within that community to demonstrate that this is a new day, that this is a new way, and that we are working on what it will take to undo the damage that has been done.
Hold on, Mike. Okay. I'm going to start with members. Also, do you have anything like that? No? Hold on, Mike. You had it. Okay, keep it down. Jamal, you have any questions or comments to make at this time?
Oh, yes, sure.
I'm just going to go around the table, give everyone a council member. And
Okay.
Judy will be next up there.
Gotcha. So, I just want to thank Councilwoman Applyrs and also Councilman Corey Ellis for when we were in that meeting with the mayor as a result, in response to the uptick of violence in my ward and Councilwoman Church Love ward, and we were throwing ideas on the table. I want to thank them for picking this idea up and running with it and putting it together to get us to this place here. This is an excellent piece of legislation, I believe, that will begin to change the narrative for communities like mine and Councilman Joyce Love. West Hill, and I'm just going to talk about from my personal experience. West Hill is a neighborhood that I grew up in, and growing up in West Hill, it wasn't easy growing up in West Hill. Certain things became a norm for me. Broken sidewalks became a norm. Asphalt sidewalks became a norm. Abandoned houses began to become a norm. And when I got to a certain age, I realized that this shouldn't be the norm. And many kids that grew up in my neighborhood walk to school every day with that thought that this is the norm. So this equity legislation will begin to show them that this is not the norm, and we're doing something as a council and as a city to change their lives for the better. So.
Thank you. I just want to keep in mind, okay, we have a council meeting after this with a quick caucus, but I want to just...
So, I echo the words that Councilman just used, but it just seems like, for me, everyone in this room knows if you say you experience living downtown and be able to move freely, our kids don't have that opportunity now. And, for a section of the city that, for decades to be underserved, and then you hear an equity agenda that's going to address it, and then all of a sudden you start hearing the upper wards, because when we voted down the skywalk, I spoke from my heart, and I looked at everyone on the other side of the room and said that maybe if people from the upper ward champion what is not going on in the lower wards, we wouldn't need an equity agenda. Because we would stand together and we would bring attention and make sure that the resources hit the places that it needs to. We don't have to talk about violence because it's on the news, we see where it's happening at. And, what they said is we're looking at the root of the issues of the cause. And this is what you have to, in order to make the change, you gotta dig deep and just coming down, putting up a playground and having a pop-up barbecue, that's not doing it anymore. People want to see change that, can give them hope that things are going to be truly different. And, it's a smack in the face that every time we bring up the equity agenda, we start hearing about sidewalks and things like that, when it's a reason why it wasn't sidewalks out there. You can't explain to me the reason why the funding hasn't been touched in the second ward, because in the second ward, there's funding going down there for rehabilitation for people from outside our community and things like that. But what message is it sending to the everyday residents that, constantly see other people come into our community and get job employment? Other people come in our community and constantly get business opportunities. I remember a time when you can go to a corner store and it was owned by somebody that lived in your community. And, those people provided more than just a corner store service. They gave credit to the community. They did a bunch of things that the community directly benefited from. And like I said, sometimes I'm down here, the people that sit on this end of the table hear me mumbling because I just think that it's wrong, If we truly care about the whole city, it's obvious something isn't going right in the lower wards. And something needs to be done. And this is a strong signal to a group of communities that have been overlooked for so long. And, the changes that are coming aren't necessarily coming for them. So, it's hard for me to sit here and listen to it go back and forth when
I don't think we're really going back and forth.
I actually said I fully supported it, and then kind of heard what you were
I'm not
saying.
talking about just today. I'm not just talking about...
Are you saying that at any point I said
No, I'm
that?
not
Right,
talking about...
let him finish because we have to keep...
What I'm saying is that, clearly, every time this subject comes up, we start talking about other things that aren't, this resolution was created and was brought about because the way the process was going, it wasn't working. It clearly wasn't working. And now that it's being addressed and it seems like it's getting blocked, it's getting, we have a different type of, it's going in different directions. I don't want everything to come to the second ward and things to be taken from you. I don't, I'm citywide.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I think we all...
Hold on, I got it, all right. We have to decide what we want to do, okay? We're supposed to have a caucus.
In 2 minutes.
We have 2 minutes, all right?
But Joe, we could have thought about that at the beginning when all the, like this is an important meeting, as you can see. This is a different type, like today, people are here because this is important to our community.
I understand.
And I'm not trying to grandstand, but I'm just saying that
Does anybody have suggestions what we want to do this evening, okay? Can we go 15 minutes? I don't think we're going to have
I
much
don't
work
think
to
you'll
take
get
in.
to everybody in 15 minutes.
No, I know. All right.
It's important that we have this conversation because this piece of resolution can have a significant impact, not only on, and what we're doing today, but for years to come.
I agree, and you know what, I think this is a very important start for a discussion, okay? I think it has to get out to more of the communities all over, so they're aware of what we're doing, okay? And just, and I think the majority, overwhelming majority, will agree with us why we're doing it, and something should happen, okay? But I think...
And if I can make
Hold on,
one-
Michael, you've
okay.
had enough, let me, all right?
Okay.
All right?
Had a suggestion.
I said I was gonna go right around, Judy, just, I'll give you 3 minutes every...
John, I'm sorry, Judy, before you start, I could not hear what you were saying, Richard. You suggested that we extend the meeting.
I mean, well, we do have to deal with caucus. We do have a public hearing tonight also.
Yeah,
On the budget.
People are going to show.
Before we even get into public comment, so we do have, it's going to be a potential one. So we can go a little
Yeah.
more.
And-
Play it
But
by
I
ear.
think you're going to have to schedule another meeting
I'd say definitely.
that'll allow for a couple of hours. I mean, this meeting was scheduled.
So Mike,
Back to
because
back.
we're taking up time, so I just wanted to be clear about the extension of the time.
We can
we
go,
are
we can
doing.
go.
Why don't we go to a
more,
quarter
but-
of, or
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
is that too much? All right,
the caucus agenda should not be any different than what we discussed previously, but we do need some time in caucus. So,
and just, you know what, just give me, there are 3 people signed up for public comment. I'm gonna definitely let those 3 people signed up
Yeah.
get into it.
Yeah.
So, at about, whatever, I'll keep my eye on the clock. Judy, go ahead, it's yours, and
Okay, so.
10 minutes and then the
support
public comment.
The concept of an equity agenda. I have some problems with the way this legislation is written because I'm a lawyer, and I think when you write legislation, you want something that is clear and enforceable. And what I see is a lot of, we're going to measure this, but then what? There's no real, like in terms of future administrations or whatever, there's nothing that requires any specific allocation, any specific action, really in the long run. So this legislation does not deal with things like building conditions, red X's. Rick LaJoy was talking about these neighborhood initiatives at our last finance committee meeting. We're going around and sending people out to ad hoc to look at conditions on the ground. And I think that would help a lot of our neighborhoods. There's one of the things that disturbs me is that we have a chart that we were provided that actually shows when it comes to grading the roads that Jamel's ward is out of the wards with the grade percentage of 1 through 5. Roads in that kind of condition. His ward actually is like number 9 on the list. And when it comes to percentage of roads in best condition, he ranks 5th in terms of a percentage. And this is kind of an issue that has been raised with regard to how do you address, prioritizing things when the only thing that we have looked at here seems to be, in terms of creating the exact standard, is wards with roads with the greatest number in 1 through 3. His ward has clearly been underserved over the years, but in terms of the measure that we're then looking at, I think we have to watch that. What then is the impact? So I think I think we should be taking a closer look at language and some of the stuff that we're doing. So we're going to measure parks, but then there's nothing that says we want to sure every park is safe? I thought that we had like
That,
The human
Judy, that
rights.
is in the legislation. If you take in fact, for the piece on parks, it asks for a lot of detailed information about how, what's in the park, from ADA compliance to equipment. So in terms of measuring safety.
All right.
Then what?
So in terms of measuring safety, one can do that given what characteristics we are asking be included in the asset map. And what I will say to you in terms of your comment about how the legislation is written, I appreciate your comment, but I disagree with it because in terms of, from my perspective, a legislative perspective, I think that legislation should provide overarching guidance with some detail versus getting so in the weeds that we are telling the administration how to do their job. And so this does not get so in the weeds that we tie this administration's hands or future administration's hands from doing the work, because things change. And so it provides guidance, but it's not going to be so descriptive that we are prescribing and saying specifically everything that needs to happen. The other point I'll make, and I'll zip it, is that this legislation can't have everything in it. And so we have gone from not having to starting. It's a starting place, and so the red X's and this, it's not going to be catch-all. It's not going to address every issue in the city. So I just wanted to make that point as you're pointing out what's not in here. I would just ask that you focus on what is in here, and if you have specific comments about that, happy to entertain your comments.
But why would we not look at things like vacant buildings, the condition of vacant buildings, and requiring
It's not our
the
infrastructure.
maintenance of
That's not our infrastructure.
the maintenance of those properties, and a program that is actually requiring them to do. One of the things I look at when I drive around some of the wards that have been historically disadvantaged is the amount of weeds. And if we had a program that ensured that either property owners or the city was, taking care of the weeds, that mentally has a big difference in how people perceive when they walk out their door.
And Judy, if you want to draft legislation to do that, I would be happy to support it.
Yeah, I don't think this piece, we're looking for an all-encompassing thing, and it's basically.
I just, my response was that when the council members came to me, we were talking about city infrastructure. So infrastructure that we controlled and that we allocated dollars to. We're going to be proposing some legislation and looking for support from some legislation around the work that we're doing around vacant buildings. But we were looking at our infrastructure, and one of the things that when you talk about a budget being a policy document, from our perspective, this legislation really then does tell us whether it's a policy document, because it has the underlying data. How we allocate our funds is how they're allocated in the budget. And you all debate that budget, and you all debate the various bonding ordinances. And I guess from our perspective, the data that, as I said, we're going to be collecting anyway is a way for us to look at each other as we make these decisions and say, are the decisions that we're making about how we're allocating our resources consistent with moving the needle on where we are across the city from the standpoint of the infrastructure that we control?
So, my final, I have a lot of, my final comment has to do with this. When we looked at the school district as a group of citizens, there was a realization that some real work needed to be done. And what the school district did, what citizens did is we created a standard of here's the minimum that needs to be done in every school in terms of creating equity and having a baseline standard. This legislation lacks that in terms of baseline standard. That's what I would like to see, because establishing expectations, a baseline standard.
Judy, I'm sorry, the data helps us to establish baseline. So again, going back to the point that the mayor has made, we have not collected data in the past. So being able to collect data will in turn allow us to establish baseline levels. So I just wanted to make that point, and I want to be respectful of the community members who are here.
Yeah, all right, hold on now.
Public comment?
We don't have time, we're going to caucus.
Judy got like 20 minutes. Creating priorities, and Randy Milano sat here and said that once a road reaches a 5 or a 6, it needs to be scheduled for repavement. And so that's another.
Judy?
I just think
Okay,
that,
Judy, all right, hold on. Judy, we're going to have to continue this, okay? I'm going to see what the committee wants to do. There's public comment, they signed up, they came for that, and I'd like to be able to let them speak. If they're finished before and we got a couple minutes, we'll, thank you, Mayor.
For an open block of time.
What? Okay, we got James Davis.
Anywhere?
Just give your name and address for the recorder there, and try to keep it,
I got you. I understand. I see we press for time. Hey, my name is James Davis. I'm a Long Life City resident of this beautiful city we call Albany. I want to speak to you guys on an opportunity perspective and a responsibility perspective real quick. So I'm going to give an analogy real quick. So right now, we have what? We have the nation, we have states, we have county, and then at the bottom, we have the city, right? So if you think about a pyramid scheme on a corporation, right, everything at the top comes down, and everyone at the bottom struggles, and no one listens, and there's a big gap, right? So this is the opportunity perspective and the responsibility perspective. Because the city, right, our beautiful municipality that's ran by our mayor and you folks, right, has been blessed with an opportunity, right now to historically change the precedent, which the city and all of us are for. And we're here to speak on that. But one thing that I noticed in regards of that, there is a systemic fear here, point blank period, that resources that will be funneled to other private communities that will take away from other communities that are more economically successful. And I think that fear is blocking the opportunity for progression and development. And I think that's something that we all need to see. Now, as a residence here, right, the only say I have is this right here. So the responsibility that I'm delegating to you guys is to figure it out outside of that fear. The equity agenda is a great agenda. It is a great idea. It will help a lot. It will help a lot of individuals, single parent mothers, working class individuals in the city. So therefore, you guys, I'm holding you guys responsible, right, to remove that red lining that you guys are, that I sensed here, right, so that we can make progress and move forward with this agenda. So therefore, we can see opportunity, we can see potential, we can see growth. All right, these things are here. As you said, historically, we know the resources are here. The mayor gave an analogy, the resources are here. People are not tapping into them, right? We know what's going on. Listen, we have things we have to get over as a collective body. Not only you guys as a collective body, but outside the residents, there's a dissonance. So us being able to see you guys come together collectively and handle these issues, now you guys got the backing of the community. But right now, you guys really don't. You really guys just got like, whatever, this, that, and the third. So I'm telling you guys that you guys can't allow that anymore, right, to stagnate the development of our city. Because now the responsibility can't be blamed on, they don't understand. No, it falls on you guys. not being able to get it together so we can move forward. So there's other people that want to speak here, and I'm not going to take up too much time, but I'm in favor for the equity agenda. I would just like for you guys to hash out your differences and remove the red lining so that we can move forward, because you have individuals in the city who understand and who would like to play a part and who've been playing a part, and we really want to get to some growth and development here. Okay? So
Thank you for coming. I think we'll get
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Chris Johnson? Just give your name and address for the
Okay.
recorder.
Chris Johnson, 270 North Pearl Street. You know, as I listened here and I was taking notes, there's two things, and I'm approaching this from an economic development standpoint for I forgot what it's called, but anyway, the equity agenda. When we say economic development, does it also include economic empowerment for the residents in these distressed wards? There's two things I'm looking at. You talk about the increase in youth violence. That's a byproduct of economic destabilization of these neighborhoods. The second is really more insidious that nobody has mentioned. The rise of artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics. How will that affect Councilman Johnson's ward, Councilman Robinson's ward, and Councilman Kimbrough's ward, when their residents can't get jobs because they've been reduced to algorithms? Okay, that's my concern. And I'm kind of talking like an economist. So what I'm hoping is that part of this package is used for preparing these distressed areas to bring them into the 21st century, so that way they can compete in the marketplace and thrive in the marketplace, not just as employees, but as entrepreneurs. And I'm an advocate, if you really want to fix this problem, part of it has to be emphasizing microenterprise, entrepreneurship, and personal financial literacy. Okay. And that's why I want to be more solution-oriented when I came here. And so, you know, in conclusion, because I want to respect the clock, as far as the resources, and I noticed that, you know, Albany gets HUD money and it goes to a certain department of the City of Albany. I want to make sure that those community development block grants are given to those agencies that can address these issues that are affecting these distressed areas. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, and I don't think we'll get to the next resolution tonight. We'll just delay that. And that could feed right into what you're looking for, scholarships to be given by the Housing Authority. I said the next thing we're supposed to take up tonight we won't get to is the resolution thanking the Housing Authority of establishing scholarships, which might feed right into what you're looking for, okay? Next meeting or thereafter. Sorry. Andrew Willis?
Good evening. Andrew Willis, 23 Marshall Street.
Thank you.
I didn't want to tell you my address because you might come and get me after this. But okay, too late. So, to begin, I am for the legislation, right? Of course, the data that you're searching for has already been prevalent in our city's data banks already for years. So, I'd just like to start out from a humble approach. I think it was Skinner that gave the example with a dog that was a puppy and it grew up in a cage. And as it grew, the owner of the cage neglected it. And the dog kept growing and growing, and then it got too big for the cage. And then the community got together and realized that it was a problem and that it was unfair and that they needed to bring some type of justice or some type of equity, as you refer to it. I refer to it more when you look at data, and the data shows it has been definitely a lot of maltreatment or neglect. It's more than just being equitable. It's concentrated effort to correct the problem. But so the community then opens the cage and lets the dog out. So now the dog is deformed. So whose fault is it? is it the fault of the dog, or is it the fault of the individuals around that particular dog as they're living? Now, of course, I'm not relaying our situation to a dog, but I'm talking about the concept. As I sat and listened, we talked about roads, streets. Those streets were made that way in the beginning for a reason, so that those lower wards couldn't walk into those communities, just as well as transportation wasn't available to reach certain communities. So, as the mayor said, and I heard a lot of other individuals say, it's time to focus on the realism of our plight in our city. So if that's true, focusing on violence is only a reaction to a problem. I posted a couple of years ago a post that I found one of the editors from the Times bringing to our attention. And on one side, it went to the left and it said Arbor Hill and the Lower Hill communities. And it gave the median income as $24,000. It's less than that now. And to the right, it gave Loudonville and all of the upper wards, and it said 100,000. So as you put together the individuals that represent those wards, count 1,000 people and count the income that that community has to develop itself, as opposed to the other wards, the higher wards, or the wards that have a more viable way of, supporting themselves or building their community. So while I'm for the agenda, I'm really concerned in seeing real issues on the table. I have not heard any real issues. While, of course, everyone wants to be safe, no one wants to see one child, one adult hurt another. What is the cause? If you go to a store and you see 5 or 6 individuals standing around the store and they're in their 30s and their 40s, then, it's probably because they don't have a job. You look at the project, 48 million on Clinton Avenue, how many of our local community residents have had the opportunity to get on those, on those projects? Look at Albany High School, 180 million. 7 years, they said, we had an opportunity to get involved. So we're going on the 2nd year. And how many of our local community residents are on that project? And if you talk to some of those other companies, we won't go into name and turn in those guys, but if you talk to them, the reality is there's only about 10 jobs each year that our community members, the local residents, qualify for. I know this because I've been keeping the data on it. We trained over 2,000 individuals already that are apprentices, electricians, plumbers, carpenters. We've been doing this for 30 years. We've been from city to city to city. And that I was born here and I live here, I feel an attachment to help. And to be honest with you, I wasn't going to come tonight, because the community that you so advocately represent has started to try to do things for themselves. But you have the tax money. So,
Andrew, I don't want to cut you off.
okay, we'll wrap it up.
I know we'll hear from you again, and we do. We haven't in a while. But,
all right.
Okay.
In closing,
Okay.
I agree with the attorney that there needs to be specific items that are placed in the legislation, so then you can find a benchmark, or you can establish a benchmark. And that will tell the truth and the sincerity of the actual legislation that's being passed.
Thank you.
Keep your ears open for the next meeting. And
Well, I'll watch the money flow. You don't have to call.
okay. Do I have a motion to?
So the next step, we will schedule a follow-up law committee meeting to continue the dialogue on this legislation.
This is your motion.
Yeah,
I second that.
But please do it on an open day when we're not crunched between a bunch of other meetings.
Next question, what's the reason that this can't be passed this evening?
From what I understand, this was supposed to be the start of a discussion.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time, probably from television, and that the rest of the community knows that this is on, in the works. And I think they should know
I don't
that.
have an issue voting on it tonight.
Because, I think, the longer this waits,
Because there's some questions about really the design, I think the technicalities in the legislation, okay? I think we should maybe, I'm not sure if it's the right thing. It should be, Richard had some ideas.
There's some more discussion. I don't want to hear disagrees with the policy objectives or the agenda itself.
No.
No one does. Some of the common suggestions I have do not relate to
Can you make the
problems
motion?
or particular points. There's some clarifications, other ways and things that need to be drawn out and stuff like that. This
It
needs
affects other,
more
I believe it
further
affects
discussion.
other parts of our code that might have to be changed, or some of this might have to go into there. I'm not sure, just some
And
things that
so
were brought up.
they are just suggestions, and based on while everybody's here and Jared is here, Jared actually graciously drafted the legislation, and based on, for council's office, the legislation in its current form is legally sound. So these are recommendations that can be accepted. or
Wusu has,
denied.
all right, I asked for a motion, and Wusu said he has a motion at this
I'll
point.
make a motion to table it for further discussion.
For further
Second.
discussion. Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Those against?
I actually, I appreciate, it's fine, but I think having a full discussion, I shared my concerns, which were not with the legislation, but with the overall equity agenda.
We just
I
made a
don't have a
motion,
problem.
right, to table it.
So,
Yeah, I think we voted.
so Jenny, are you saying that you are comfortable voting it out of committee voting it out of committee tonight?
I am.
Okay, so then I would like to offer up.
There's a motion on the table right
Yeah,
now.
to
But
adjourn.
I want to offer up a second motion. If there is a sentiment that this legislation can be voted out of committee, then I would recommend that. So I motion that we
Yeah, I
table
did not have
the.
an opportunity to have a
I-
motion to table.
Okay, no.
I motion that we table.
That's
move
true,
by motion to table.
that's true. There were members that, well, 3 here, and I know Tom Hoey had some concerns. I don't know what happened to him. I thought he was going to be here tonight.
So of those who are here,
Okay.
so there's a table on the floor. I would recommend that that table be removed, and I would motion then for us to consider and vote on
No,
the legislation tonight.
I don't believe anybody tabled. There was a motion to hold it for further discussion.
You said table.
Wusu's motion. I seconded it. Yeah,
It was voted, I just,
yeah, I thought it was.
Unless he withdraws this.
I withdraw my motion, yeah.
You're withdrawing it?
Yeah, I'm withdrawing my motion.
I'll make a motion to table and to adjourn it to a time when we have a sufficient amount of time, not just an artificially limited amount of time.
So then we vote on the motion.
Well, I think in order is that Owusu's now withdrawn, in order to make a second motion, her motion now needs to be attended to, and then Mike's will be.
Okay, there's a motion on the table from, pardon me? 1, 2, 3, 5 of us.
It's confusing. Okay, you made a motion.
Okay.
Yes, so I'm making a motion that we actually vote on the legislation tonight as a committee.
Those in favor?
I think it's unfair that I do not have an opportunity, others do not have opportunity.
Aye.
Yeah, I would
Discussion
agree.
or express anything.
No. Yeah.
Aye.
I say, I vote no because I'm looking for more discussion. I don't think it's fair to,
And I would vote no because I don't think we've had the opportunity to have the full discussion. And I thought we came
Motion
into this,
passed.
and I thought
So
we
it's
came
3
into
to
this
2.
tonight with some decisions about making the making the ordinance workable.
The
More
motion.
workable.
So much for collegiality. We have about 14 people for the public hearing tonight,
So I just
and
want
4 for public
John,
comment.
so I just want to make sure I'm clear. So the motion passes 3 to 2.
no, the motion passes.
Yes.
Phone calls,
So the motion, we voted on the motion. There were 3 members, there were 3 yeses and 2 no.
The 2 noes are,
You and
You and
oh, I'm
Councilman.
no, I said no, I'm not for it. I
Right.
said, yeah.
So there were 3 in favor. So 3 to 2. So the motion then based on the numbers passes.
Yes, to vote out of committee.
to vote it out of committee.
Yes.
No, Joe. No. The motion was to vote on this legislation tonight as a committee.
Yes.
When you polled, there were 3 out of 5 members who voted in
That was
favor.
not my intention. I'm sorry.
No, you voted no, but 3 members, myself, Owusu,
yes.
and Jenny.
Voted
You
yes.
vote on it tonight?
Yeah.
Yes. So the motion passes.
Passes.
Good. Are we having caucus or not?